as mothers, we, especially as a perfectionist, high achiever, we want to have this control because it comes from a loving place. We don't realize that it's driven by fear, but it comes from a good place, right? It comes from a loving place because we care so much. And what we realize is that for me as a high performer, for so long in my life, I will say a good 40 years, I lived my life trying to be good enough for God, trying to show him that I was somehow worthy of salvation, or I was good enough. And just these last few years, I finally got hit over the head like with a 2x4 and realized that, oh my gosh, he doesn't want me to show him I'm good enough. I don't have anything to prove to him. He wants me to release some of this stuff I'm carrying on my shoulders and give it to him. And then as soon as I did that, literally like within weeks, my life started to change, because I realized that there's no shame in me handing the worry I have of my kids and their health and wellness, and whether or not there's a flood or a tornado or whatever is coming to my mind, and just saying, Lord, I know you've got this. I'm giving it to you right now, and just verbalize that. And it took so much off of my plate.
Hey everybody, it's Pastor Tom, the 24 Today podcast. Thank you so much for listening in. Moms, I really want to talk to you today. Let me give you just some terms and see if you identify with any of these. Helicopter mom. Could you maybe use a little help with that? And I think it's super common, so don't feel like you're the only one. Here's some other terms: overwhelmed, underappreciated, not understood, worrying about your kids, and mom guilt. So we are going to hit all of those in just a matter of a few minutes in this interview. Kendra is a mom and has so much experience with that. She has 20 years of business consulting experience. She's been a senior consultant and executive to Fortune 500 companies, but most of all, right now, she is a faith-based professional success coach and has a huge interest in helping moms be all they can be. So, Kendra, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here, Tom.
It's really my pleasure. My pleasure, too. Kendra, tell us a little bit about where you work, where you live, your family, so forth.
Yeah, so I actually work from home. I live in Northern California with my family, my husband and 2 boys. They're ages 5 and 6 years old. And I work for myself. I am a faith-based success coach who works with women to help them return to what I call is their God-given natural state of being, which is he wants us to be joyful, and happy, and peaceful. And so we can get into a little bit more of that.
Yeah, because I have a feeling that you had a point in your life that you weren't feeling that, and so you've shifted over to wanting to feel that and then help others.
Absolutely.
Didn't mean to interrupt you there, but before we really get rolling here, tell me what the term Christian mompreneur means. Yes. Christian mompreneur.
Well, so I really struggled because I came from 20 years of corporate high-tech work, and when I decided that I really was being called by God to do my own thing, it was years in the making. And then I just kept hearing, I'll let you know when it's time. I'll let you know when it's time. And when I really felt the nudge that it was time, not only from him, but in my physical life, not just my spiritual life, I was noticing degradation in my relationships with my husband and kids. I was crabby all the time. I was just really starting to feel overwhelmed. And so I was having a hard time identifying with, well, what is it that I want to do? And in my soul searching and work, I realized that what I identified with was moms who also have entrepreneur-like skills and tendencies. So they're entrepreneurs. It's just that they also happen to be moms as well. And so that creates a whole new dynamic in the entrepreneurial world. And so some entrepreneurs don't like it. They don't want to be called mompreneur. I love it. I find that there's a big audience out there. There's women out there that want to create their own businesses of any size, and they're moms. And those are 2 very important roles in their life, and they want them to be equal. So that's where we come with mompreneur. And then I identify myself as Christian or faith-based because that is critical to me. And that's where my life and my foundation is, as well as my business is. And so I will work with somebody of any faith. I want to be really clear on that in terms of supporting them. But the work I do is through the lens of the Bible.
Okay.
And so I like people to know who I am and what they're getting into, so there's no surprises.
Sure. And you left a lucrative job, in the business world to do this.
Yeah, I had been in it for 20 years, so I was making a good 6-figure salary, and I had the benefits to work from home, and really had a lot of flexibility in my schedule with my kids. I only had to go in the office maybe once a month, if that.
Wow.
I really, had a situation that I think a lot of people would give anything for. And that became a real challenge for me, honestly, in terms of turning to God in my prayer and realizing, why can't I just be content? Why can't this just be good enough? And what I kept hearing from him was, you're capable of becoming more. You're capable of becoming more. And I didn't know what that looked like yet. I just had to trust him.
I'm going to read you a direct quote from your website. And by the way, speaking of your website, it is KendraDahlstrom.com. That is KendraDahlstrom.com. And it's a beautiful website. There's so much good stuff. It's so well done. All kinds of good stuff there for moms or really anybody. There's a blog. There's a free download that'll give you a life purpose calling. It's really good. I looked at it. I like to work on it myself. It just helps you to understand your life purpose calling, just like it says. But I'm going to give you a direct quote and let you talk about it. So here's what you say on your website. And you're talking about the spring of 2017, and you say, I quote, "I had experienced many signs throughout my life that I would be connected to God in a closer way. After almost 20 years in corporate, I was burnt out, exhausted, my marriage was stressed, and I felt like the unhealthiest person I knew." So can you tell us a little bit more about what was going on in that time?
Yeah, from the outside, I think I looked like I had it all together, right? I had this job, I had, I have a very strong marriage, but I just wasn't feeling like I wanted to give in the way that I used to, like to my kids, my husband. I was on a short fuse. What I realized is that also led to, I guess what I would call our intimacy challenges. And when I say intimacy, I don't just mean in the sexual context. I mean, the definition that I have been told of intimacy, which I love, is into me, you see. And it's just a chance to let people see into you, into your soul, and let people in. And so I love that definition. And so my connection at that deeper soul level with my husband and my kids, I felt like was really fading away a little bit. And I didn't like that direction that it was going in. I also felt I woke up every day tired, just wanting to go to bed. And I remember distinctly a conversation I had with my son that really was a large catalyst in me moving in this direction. Was we'd gone back from a vacation. He's 5. He didn't want to go to bed. He was complaining about going to bed, and I said, "What do you mean, buddy? That's my favorite time of day." And my husband looked at me and just kind of raised his eyebrow, like, "What?"
Yeah.
Like, the morning should be your favorite time of day, to seize the day and appreciate what God's blessings are, and wondering what miracles are going to come your way each day. It's okay to have, days where you're like, "Oh, I'm so glad to go to bed." But this was pervasive for me. I couldn't wait to go to bed. And when I woke up, I was exhausted and I just wanted to go to bed again. And so something was draining me. And through prayer and just connection with Christ, I realized that it was my job. It was not filling my soul. And I was feeling a calling that I needed to do something more purposeful to impact others' lives. And so that's really sort of what that was about.
It's interesting when you say that because of your overworked, overstressed, overscheduled life, that it hurts your level of intimacy, in that you were not allowing those closest to you to really see who you were and what you're going through. What is it, do you think, about that, about stress and overwork, that instead of us opening up and saying, man, I need some help with this, we close up, right? That's what you're saying? What is that?
Well, from what I've learned in coaching, and it's really been transformative and helpful to me, that I think will help your listeners, is if we look at it through the lens of the Bible, everything is either in love or fear, right? I mean, we can even break it down to looking at Christ and God and Satan, right? It's sort of everything is either in love or fear. And so when we look at that, when we have a general sense of overwhelm and stress, it's really a fear response. And it's fear oftentimes of judgment. It's fear of looking like you're a perfectionist and you don't want people to see that you're not perfect. It could be a fear of people pleasing and upsetting people. And all these things cause overwhelm. And so what I've found in myself that's true for me is that when I am able to cut off intimacy to myself, because I don't want to see what's really going on inside of me, because that means I actually have to make a change and actually do something different and maybe make a big move like I ended up doing. We project that. And so you end up cutting off that connection with others. Wow. So it's really an inward job.
Okay, so you didn't realize it, but you were very much motivated by fear, which was kind of what was driving you to that. And then you'd make a life change with that life change comes another boatload of fear, a different kind. Had to have, right? Because now you leave this great job that everyone else would want, making great money, and now trying to make it on your own, a whole nother type of fear. So you go from one fear to another.
Right. No, it's totally true. And I will say the difference in the fear was my experience with it. So the first, round of fear was very much like, it didn't feel connected to God, if that makes sense in any way. The second round of fear, because I was doing it as my answering to his calling of me, I had trust and faith in his knowledge and his wisdom and his Jeremiah 29:11, right? His plans and purpose for me. You can see I have that back here.
I see that.
That's what led me to.
And I'm gonna read it right from your board for those that are just listening to the audio. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. And that's Jeremiah 29:11. So continue your thought.
You've got good eyes. So that's really what drew me, also was part of this journey that was very much a catalyst in my experience. And so I just really immersed myself even more into the Word than I ever thought was possible. I think we often live our lives thinking that we know that there's room for growth in closeness and our intimacy with the Lord, but I don't think we realize how much room there is to grow more intimate with Him until you actually start doing it. And you're like, whoa, I really was living life a little different 6 months or a year ago. And so I really started getting intimate with the Lord and really trusting and just having faith that He had a plan for me. And I will tell you, it has not been perfect, but He has laid it out and He has always provided. And so that has continued to just help me get rid of what I would call a calling blocker that's very typical for people that gets in the way of them fulfilling their calling and purpose is fear.
Interesting phrase, calling blocker. Is that what you said?
Blocker.
Interesting.
Yeah, I actually got it from a book that's called Live Your Calling, and it's a really great book that I also read sort of through my transformation.
Wow, I like that thought. Now, as part of the fear, God leads us into these times where we have to come to the fact that we have to come to the reality that we're not in control. Somehow we have it wrong, and we fool ourselves into thinking that we are in control when we're like the person at the the circus or whatever, who's spinning all those plates. Remember the vision I'm talking about? So, and somehow we think we're in control because all the plates are still spinning, but it's just, seconds away from falling apart. And by the way, when you were talking earlier, someone I was interviewing recently was saying that a lot of times we seem to get that the scripture, we misunderstand it when scripture says that God won't put on us any more than we can handle. And he was saying that the reality is that God does that all the time so that we will realize that we have to depend on him. So I guess it's the reality of that verse is that he's not going to put so much that it's just going to crush us without any chance of responding or whatever. But really, he does lead us, like he did you, into moments that you realize, man, this is really out of control. And if I don't give this to God, it's really going to fall apart quick.
Absolutely. Or I'm going to break.
Yeah,
right? And just fall apart. And so I completely agree with that. And that's been my experience of it as well. I think that sometimes he will give us more and more and more until we do, as the book of Matthew says, is like, okay, release your burdens on me. And if I may connect that to motherhood, as mothers, we, especially as a perfectionist high achiever, we want to have this control because it comes from a loving place. We don't realize that it's driven by fear, but it comes from a good place, right? It comes from a loving place because we care so much. And what we realize is that for me as a high performer, for so long in my life, I will say a good 40 years, I lived my life trying to be good enough for God, trying to show him that I was somehow worthy of salvation or I was good enough. And just these last few years, I finally got hit over the head like with the 2x4 and realized that, oh my gosh, he doesn't want me to show him I'm good enough. I don't have anything to prove to him. He wants me to release some of this stuff I'm carrying on my shoulders and give it to him. And then as soon as I did that, literally like within weeks, my life started to change because I realized that there's no shame in me handing the worry I have of my kids and their health and wellness and, whether or not there's a flood or a tornado or whatever is coming to my mind and just saying, Lord, I know you've got this. I'm giving it to you right now, and just verbalize that. And it took so much off of my plate. So I really agree. I think there's magic in that.
Yeah. So Kendra, there's a term that we hear used, and it's helicopter mom, which my understanding of the term is just the hovering over your child in kind of every situation, whether it be school or just hovering so close that it's hard for them or anyone else even involved with them to be able to breathe. And is there more that you can add to that description before we talk about it?
I would just really add so that there's no judgment from anyone here, because it's not so much Tom or myself judging you. I want you to know that's not the case at all. There may be some judgment of yourself if you identify with that. And I just wanted to clarify here that helicopter momming comes from a very loving place. It comes from a place that you care so deeply that you don't want your child to get hurt. And oftentimes it's experiencing what you've experienced in your life, or you have friends of friends, or you see something on the news and you're like, oh, I don't want that to be my kid. I feel so blessed that, that it hasn't happened, quote unquote, yet. And so you end up going into a fear mode.
And the world is so dangerous. It's so much more dangerous than it was when I was, parenting young children. And so I do understand that. And then also, like you said, depending on where you've come from, if you come from a situation where maybe you were left alone too much, and your parents really weren't involved like they should have been, then it causes you to maybe overreact.
Yeah.
In that.
It also, I am not a counselor or therapist. However, I do work in parallel care with a lot of clients who are in counseling and working with therapists and whatnot. And one thing that I come across that's pretty common as well is people who are helicopter moms, it's about control.
Mm-hmm.
And so the sense of control usually is a common theme with control is safety. It makes us feel safe when we are controlling something because then it's predictable. We can know the outcome and there's no surprises. And so that can come from a variety of different factors, from having a very turbulent and unpredictable childhood to actually be going through abuse as a childhood and just always being on eggshells. Control means safety. And so that's not always the case, but that can often be the case as where, helicopter momming manifests.
So Kendra, have you struggled personally with being a helicopter mom, and did this life change of going into your own business, did that, if you do struggle with that, did that even increase it all the more?
Great question. So yes, I've struggled with helicopter momming. There's times when my husband would joke, why don't you just bubble wrap them, because you love this child so much that you don't want them to hurt. And what you do is you start to project that hurt onto you, like, oh, I remember how much it hurt when I did this or that. And there's certain things that make sense, like you don't want your child going out onto a deck that's 4 feet high without a railing just by themselves. I mean, that is considered what I would consider normal, versus letting your child play on a 6-inch step in the house while you're sitting there. They're going to learn. They're going to fall once and they'll learn, Mm-hmm. So that's kind of, subject to opinion. But what I will tell you is that if it's causing you stress or anxiety, then it's a good indicator that it's helicopter momming. And I will tell you that I struggled with it. I wanted my kids to not have to go through some of the experiences I went through, or just things that you see on the news or TV, or that you just worry about because your brain is just so in worry mode that you just start making up scenarios. And I will tell you, as I started my own business, that actually started to go away, because the nature of the work I do is coaching. And so I did a lot of self-analysis and a lot of work, and I realized that I'm actually making it worse, and I'm not serving them by protecting them. They need to learn lessons for themselves. I can't just let them have decisions made for them all the time. Otherwise, I'm not equipping them to be these grown-up people that they're going to eventually be. So the coaching work I do really helps with that. In addition to that, I think the fact that I felt a real sense of fulfillment with the work I'm doing, and felt very close to God in the nature of the work I'm doing, and I'm at home and I can connect with Him several times a day, whether it's through a longer prayer or, a shorter meditation, whatever it is, I really started to notice my stress level go down, and therefore the need for helicopter momming and that control dissipated. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can remember the first time putting my child on the school bus, and just the thought of, you see their backpack go up the steps, and then you wonder where they're sitting, and you wave goodbye, and there they go. Or the first time that you allow your child to spend the night at someone's house, even though you've checked it out and you feel great about everything, but still, man, you really are out of control, aren't you? I mean, you just can't totally stay in control of anything.
Absolutely, and I still will, just to be clear, it's much better, but it still comes up for me. I mean, my kids will stay the night at my mother-in-law's, who we completely trust. They love her. She raised, 3 great kids of her own. She's completely dependable. And I will still find myself at 10 at night, and I'll vocalize it just because I think it's healthier than keeping it inside. I'll tell my husband, I hope the kids are okay. I know they are. And he goes, you just always worry. You'll worry. And then I know at that moment, then I pray. I say, Lord, I know that you've got this. That's all I can do. You've got this.
And you are saying that you believe in doing that God is really more capable even than you are at being a mom. That's a hard one to admit, isn't it? That's a hard one that someone is more capable than Kendra is at being mom to Kendra's kids.
Yeah. And even like in moments like where I would get frustrated with my kids, which isn't a topic we brought up yet, but I'm feeling overwhelmed and I get frustrated with them and I'm trying to communicate to him and ask, sometimes I'll just say, I'll leave and I'll just go say a prayer to God and say, God, please give my son the wisdom and the knowledge and to help teach him, help lead him, because I know you're capable and I really need your support right now. And I'll say a prayer. And it's interesting. It seems like that, and often cases, is way more effective than me trying to sit down and have a conversation with him. So,
would you say that with your kids would be potentially the most difficult time to, or scenario of you having to let go of control as a mom? I mean, would there be anything else that?
No, kids for sure, because there seems to be, for me, a level of how much you love something, the more control you want to have. So I think, that makes a lot of sense if you think of relationships and people who, can become controlling or this or that. Obviously, there's psychosomatic issues that can be unrelated to this, but I think that, prior to having kids, it used to be my relationships, like wanting to know what was going on with my boyfriends and this and that, because I wasn't in the healthiest relationships. And then once I met my husband, I was in a really good place, and we've never had that issue or problem. So I'm really grateful for that. So I would definitely say it's kids. Yeah.
So that verse that we were just talking about, Jeremiah 29:11, applies to your kids also. That
absolutely.
God has a plan when they're on the school bus, and God's already thought of it, and worked it out, and but that's hard. I know it's hard.
Right, and he has a purpose for them too.
Yeah.
So it goes both ways. They can be our teachers too. Right?
Absolutely. Kendra, take just a quick reminder of who you are and your website. Also, listeners, you can find out more about me at 24today.org. I've got that's my blog, and I've got just lots of things on there that I think are just positive helps for you each day. I've got interviews like this. Also, tomwhitesel.com. That's TOMWHITESEL.com has other teachings. I've got a 24 Today Facebook page that's just full of just positive living things. But Kendra Dohlstrom has a website that you need to go to, KendraDahlstrom.com. She has a blog that she writes. Again, there's that free download. She has workshops. She also has an online course called Live Your Calling. There's also a great Bible studies there, life and business Bible study style course. Tell us a little bit about any of those, Kendra, that you want to talk about.
Sure. So my online course is actually transitioning this year in 2019 to a membership community.
Okay.
So it's actually going to be more than just online course. There's actually 4 separate courses. The first 3 are just for anybody looking to connect deeper into God and their faith and connecting that to their purpose and their calling, whether it's their primary calling to perpetuate the kingdom and be here to serve, or whether it's what we would call a personal calling, which is, okay, how does this translate into like what I want to do for a living to actually make money and prosper? And we talk about getting rid of fear. We talk about partnering to co-create with God and beautiful methods and tools in doing that. And then the last segment is for people who actually want to build a business out of it. Like, okay, now that I know all this, like, how can I make money, or how can I really make a business out of this? So that would be applicable to anyone who wants to make a business. The first 3 are really applicable to anybody. And so the membership community will offer that course, as well as we're going to be doing a book club. We're going to be doing some Bible studies. We're actually going to have a coaching corner where you can get some just support in terms of receiving faith-based coaching in your life. And then we're also going to bring in outside experts to give advice on, a variety of different things. And then it's also going to be for people who want to be coaches and they're interested in maybe looking into coaching or looking into a spot, growing their coaching practice and they're already a coach, or they're looking to get into the speaking business or grow their speaking business and they're interested in a faith-based perspective to that. There's going to be a whole coaching center segment of the membership site for that to support them. It is $99 a month, or you can pay $900 up front for the year. For your listeners, I will actually make it lower, so they can do either $750 for the year, or it would be actually $59 a month. So I'm willing to extend that promo offer to your audience.
So just mention 24 Today podcast and good. Okay.
So I'll make an affiliate link, and we can get that set up and send it over, and they can use that. And I'll create a promo code to give to you that you can post in this when you post it. So that is really exciting to me, because God spoke to me and said, listen, you're not in this, in this membership community site to make money. You just want to cover the cost of running the community. So that's really where that money is going. It's going nowhere else. And this is your way of growing your ministry. You are growing your business and going to be making, your life profitable doing other things. This is just a way of giving back a resource and giving people support in an area that typically costs thousands and thousands of dollars. So it's a great asset.
Sure. Yeah. So that's KendraDahlstrom.com, and you can find out more about Kendra there and what we were just talking about. There's a contact area where they can just contact you and ask questions, and is this for me, or what if I'm in this situation, is this going to work? And they can do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and my biggest thing is, I used to have all these questions and do all this stuff, and I really pulled away from that, because I realized that in the nature of the business that people just contact me for whatever reason it is. I email them back. We have a discussion that's, about whatever it is that's going on for them. No obligation, just an opportunity to create a space of getting to know each other and exploring what's possible. Sure. And then we move forward from there. Yeah.
Kendra, I look at moms and I just can't believe all they do. And I wonder, how in the world do you do all that you do? And along with that comes feeling overwhelmed. And are there boundaries that you can really set as a mom to not feel overwhelmed? Or do you want to talk a little bit about being overwhelmed?
Yeah. Well, I see overwhelm is connected to control, right?
Okay.
Overwhelm typically comes about when there's an upset inside of ourselves. We either are fearful of something that is going to happen that hasn't happened yet. So it's like, oh, I'm overwhelmed because, I just got an email and this might happen. My electricity is going to go off if I don't pay it tomorrow. Right. It hasn't happened yet in the present moment, but it may happen. Or you're overwhelmed because you are trying to avoid a future outcome, or you're trying to get to a future outcome. So it's like, I have to do all these things or this isn't going to happen, right? But it's still all future based. And what I found is that the more that you can just stay present in the moment and really connect with God. And I even ask him, I say, okay, of this list of 50 things that I have to do today, where do I need to focus, Lord? Yeah. Like, where do you want me to focus? And then I'll just listen and hear him say, and sometimes it's only 3 or 4 things, and that's all I do that day. And guess what? The bills still get paid, kids still get fed. I mean, there's certain things that obviously you have to do, like feed the children. Sure. But it really takes that puts things in perspective in terms of what is leaning into his plan for you, and what is really something that's important for you to do, and what's just on the list and just adding unnecessary stress. So, there's some things like that. There's other people who have gotten themselves into situations, and I was one of them prior, who have things that they all have to do. Like, there's no getting around everything they have to do. And so that's where boundaries come into place, because how do we get ourselves into that situation? Is it perfectionism? Is it people pleasing? Why is it that we are letting ourselves get into this situation over and over and over again, where our calendar is completely full and we don't even have time to eat or go to the bathroom or think, for 2 seconds before we go to the next meeting? Maybe it's having a conversation with your manager. Maybe it's putting buffers between each of your meetings so you actually have time to and space to just be quiet between these calls. It's about taking leadership inside of yourself and coming from a loving place for yourself. It's about having compassion for yourself And that is, in my opinion, the antidote to overwhelm. Have some compassion for yourself and treat yourself like you would treat other people. Yeah. Because oftentimes when you look at the schedule that you have put upon yourself, you wouldn't wish that on anybody.
Sure. Yeah. Kendra, clients, I'm sure, come to you, moms come to you and say, I am underappreciated, and they are. I am underappreciated and I'm not understood. What do you say to them?
Well, first I say, I really hear you.
Yeah.
I really, really hear you, because, you know, not making it about me, but I've been there. I get that, right? I ask questions. I get really curious. I mean, one of my coaches I work with is like, ask questions like a 3-year-old, you know, because to me, I can never tell them why they're feeling what they're feeling. I need to get under it. And then once I get under it and ask a lot of questions, then, you know, that's when I look at things through the lens of the Bible to help provide support. What I will say, you know, since we're on this podcast and I'm not actually talking to a client, is a general, you know, reason for feeling underappreciated is, again, it goes back to sort of projections, is that you're not appreciating yourself. You're not having compassion for yourself, your time, what you do. You know, you may be telling yourself subconsciously, like, oh, I'm just a stay-at-home mom. He's the one that's out there making the money. And then there's resentment because he gets to go out and you don't. I don't know what your story is, so I don't want to, you know, make that up, but that's a common one that I see. And you are not just a stay-at-home mom. Momming is a big job, and there's no just in that sentence. It is God-given. God created us to carry children in the womb and give birth, and intended for us to mother them. I mean, this is our life, right? Only in recent times has it become upon us where it's like we're expected to go out and make money and do these things. So I think a lot of it just comes to identifying self-worthiness and looking at it through the lens of the Bible, and that, you know, God loves all his children, and John 3:16, that, you know, he gave his only son for us, and that's a big deal.
I'm not sure there's any other role in life that potentially comes with more guilt than being a mom. And I've never been a mom, but just from observation, there's so much guilt potential that's heaped upon from everywhere, including the church, you know, on moms.
There's a lot in, it's almost like you can't do anything right, right? There's a lot of judgment. So it's like you're, you know, darned if you do, darned if you don't. You discipline them and then you feel bad for doing it. I mean, sometimes discipline is the hardest thing ever. I feel so bad when my son's crying in his room for 2 hours or something, but he's just like stepped over the line way too much and he has to stay in there. And I know it's what's best for him. I know it's what's serving him, but it makes me feel horrible. I mean, I go cry in my room. And so there's guilt on that level, like with discipline. There's guilt if you discipline and you overdo it. Like, you know, you spank them 2 or 3 times, and I've been guilty of doing that too. And it's like, okay, I kind of lost it. Like, I shouldn't have done that, you know. So then I go in and have a conversation with him, and I say, you know, Mommy, really, I apologize. That will never happen again. And, you know, I stuck to my word and never happened again. But, you know, we have to be honest about these things, because if we hide them and don't talk about it, then we judge ourselves. And then that's where the guilt comes from. Once we have compassion for ourselves and are like, okay, I'm human. I had this experience. I need to own it and move on from it. God forgives me. I need to forgive myself. I mean, that's the thing I found that's the hardest about parenting, is God's forgiving us. He loves us. He's a forgiving God. It's us forgiving ourselves. And oftentimes, just to speak to what you mentioned about the church, I think, you know, whether it's women's ministry or women in the church or even just mom friends, what comes up a lot is, if moms are judging you, just know that they're judging themselves. And that's where that's coming from, is they're judging you because they're judging themselves. And so the only one that should ever be the judge of you, as we all know, is God. Right. And so just do the best you can, and just have some compassion and love for yourself, and just know you're doing the best you can at any given moment, and be honest with your kids, and if you mess up, acknowledge that. Sure. Yeah.
Listeners, we're going to wrap up here in just a few more moments, but we are definitely going to hit the helicopter mom one more time, but directly in connection with fear, and just some ideas from the Bible, John chapter 14, verse 27, that Kendra can share a little bit with us. But again, a reminder, KendraDahlstrom.com. Kendra, and last name is DAHLSTROM.com. Head there. You can also find her on Facebook, on Twitter, on Pinterest, on LinkedIn. Just search Kendra Dahlstrom. You'll find her in a lot of places. Again, you can find me at 24today.org and tomweitzel.com and on Facebook. I also have a YouTube channel where I've got a whole bunch of different interviews like this one. So Kendra, let's head down now to the home stretch. I want to talk one more time about being helicopter mom and directly in connection with fear. As we've talked about, fear seems to be the core issue. So you talk a lot about John chapter 14. And also John chapter 4, verse 18. You've got a couple of exercises with questions that people can kind of work through. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that? And then I've got literally some of the questions that I'll read that you have for people.
Okay, you have those. Okay,
I do.
So, yeah, so just to sum it up, as we said, control is where helicopter parenting usually stems from. And as you can imagine, trying to be everywhere all at once and worrying, which takes a huge amount of energy and mind share from us, on top of what we have going on in our daily lives, it just adds a huge amount of stress. And so that creates overwhelm, right? And then what happens is you're overwhelmed because you're doing everything, you're doing all these things, and then you start to feel underappreciated because you're overextending yourself. And so what that kind of gets into is an act of people-pleasing versus serving people. With people-pleasing, the result is resentment, right? With serving, it's actually a sense of fulfillment and love. And so that's a really hard one for a lot of us moms to kind of get to and to actually realize and relate to, is that like, oh, I'm doing things out of people-pleasing from resentment, and I resent them, versus like, oh, I'm doing it for fulfillment.
Sure.
And so that's something to kind of unpack there. But overwhelm leads to underappreciation, and then you don't feel understood because you're like, well, wait a minute, I'm doing all these things, I don't feel heard, I don't feel understood, I'm just sitting here all day, you're at work, whatever the situation is, and then that leads to more worry, and the next thing you know, you feel guilty because that you're kind of overreacting because you're overwhelmed, and that you're not feeling appreciated and not understood, and you're blowing a short fuse with your kids and your husband. And so then you just feel guilty all the time because you're over. So it's really all connected. It's like a vicious cycle. Right. And so I work with a lot of my clients to help get them out of that cycle. Okay. When it comes, again, thinking of things in love and fear in biblical terms, when I look at fear, did you want to ask the questions, or do you want me to ask them? Either one.
Okay. Well, the first one, comes from John chapter 4, verse 18. Are your actions based on who you really are and what you really want in your life, or are you acting in fear?
Right, and that just comes from really understanding what is our purpose? Who are we? I mean, we're God's children. He gave His only Son for us. That is our truth, right? That's who we are as a person. And so really understanding, what that all means and who you are love. God is of love. He is, He speaks love, He gives love, He is of love. And so we are of God, so we are of love. And so that is who you are. And so to really think about actions that you take through the day and just ask yourself, am I doing this in love or fear? And just that awareness alone can really start to change your patterns and where you're, what you're doing and how you're talking to people. I think another really important question is that when you hear the voice of fear in your head, like telling you to do something or not do something, get quiet and ask yourself whose voice it is that you're hearing. Because oftentimes, if it's something that's fear, it's not ever usually who my clients or myself I would identify as God. It's not that for me, it's an intuition, like a deeper, it's a feeling with a voice that comes with it. It's usually sometimes your own voice, your mothers, your fathers. It could be someone else that's like, oh, you shouldn't do that. You know, you shouldn't ride your bike without your helmet, or, you know, it's usually someone else's. So that's a really great question. If you need a litmus on like, okay, well, whose voice am I hearing here? Am I being guided by God right now?
Right.
Because sometimes you may be. And if you don't know, that's okay too. But just start that practice.
Sure.
You know, and I think that in general, I think that there's a lot of, you know, exercises and things that, you know, I give on my website that I'm more than happy to share with your folks here in terms of, you know, what to do and how to deal with fear.
Sure.
I think that one of the most critical things that may not seem like it's connected, but it is to help deal with fear is to actually go back. And I have a document I can share with your audience. It's called Purpose Finder, and it helps you identify what your purpose is. And I'm not just talking about your personal purpose, like your personal calling, like what you're going to do for a career. That is in the document, but it really helps root you in what our primary purpose is here, and goes through Bible verses and helps you really understand what it means to really live by John 3:16. And are we each living our lives each day as if Jesus died for us and us alone, not the group we or the aggregate, but what if it was just me here on earth and he was, you know, he still would have done what he did. And, you know, and that's evident to us through the Bible. So are we living our life that way? And a lot of us can admit at times, you know, I'm really not. And it's okay. And I know he forgives me, but I'm going to start doing more and to live my life that way. So I think once you're really rooted in your purpose, it gives you a sense of all knowing, because you're suddenly connected to his wisdom and his knowledge and the faith and trust. And that can only be given to you through spirit. And once you have that, it's just so much easier to not pay attention to that fear.
Sure. And I can put a link on my site and I'll also on the show notes on the podcast for that as well. And I'm assuming they can find this on your websites as well, on your website.
They can, as well as what I call a godly goal mapping guide, which is just a great 5-step process that helps people, whether you own your own business or not, to look at how do I co-create? How can I start to look at goals in my life, whether it's weekly, monthly, you know, or annually, with God in mind? How can I start to look at, you know, goals and objectives and planning with God in mind? Sure.
Kendra, just one final thought, and that is what word of encouragement would you give? And I know it's hard when you're not sitting across from somebody that's asking you this, but what word of encouragement would you give just moms today who are feeling overwhelmed or out of control or fearful?
I would share with them that they are more than enough. You are created in God's image, and you are more than enough. Know it, live it, be it, and you will be able to transform your relationships and your own sense of self-worth.
Kendra, it's been a joy to spend time with you today. Again, listeners, you can find her at KendraDahlstrom.com. You can find me at 24today.org, the other places that I've mentioned. But Kendra, thank you again for your time, and thank you for also the promo that you mentioned earlier for the listeners, and I will also have a link on my sites as well for that. But Kendra, thank you again for your time. It's been a joy talking to you today.
You too. Real honor. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. And just a reminder to everyone that there's still time left in this 24-hour period to live life today. If this podcast has been helpful for you and you haven't already subscribed, just go to the subscribe button that you'll see on the page and subscribe. That way you'll make sure that you get everything that I put on the podcast the moment that it's available. And if it's helpful for you, it probably would be helpful for someone that you know as well. If you could send them a link or tell them about the podcast, and then also comment on the particular podcast wherever you're at. Rate it, if you will, and that will help others to be able to see and hear about the podcast.